Welcome to the latest episode of Trojans Wired, the podcast, which is an in-house production of the website Trojans Wire. We are part of the College Wire Network, and we are back with USC women's basketball analyst CC Clay. And, whenever there's news, right, we go to the podcast, we give you the USC women's basketball and Big Ten women's basketball coverage that you're looking for here at Trojans Wired. So, CC, the news is USC's women's basketball schedule just dropped earlier this week, the opponents, but also the dates, and like how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. And for longtime listeners of this show, that we CC and I both care about not just the alignment of the opponents, but the dates and home roads, road trips. Is USC getting enough rest? So we're gonna dive into all of that on this show. And so CC, just we're gonna take this layer by layer. But first off, your 40,000-foot big picture view of this USC Big Ten schedule.
Yeah, it's brutal. But before I get into that, I love music. I mean, I love music and I love R&B. I love old school R&B. And I was in YouTube the other day and an artist popped up and I was like, let me check it out. And the song was just so dope that I said, I gotta help promote it. I gotta help people see it. The artist's name is Mastro Pierre, and I'm gonna drop the link in the description of the YouTube video when I put this out. And y'all go check this song out. If you are a Brent Faiyaz fan or a Daniel Caesar fan, this song is very melodic. It's very soulful. And, I think we got to start helping out the young artists because a lot of them are streaming now and going independent. They're not tied to labels. And I think we got to help young artists out when we can. And like I said, this dude, you don't see his face or anything. It's just the music. So go check him out. His name is Maestro Pierre. And, I'm a big fan already. So y'all do your part. Go listen to the video or go listen to the song.
We would certainly like to be sponsored, but we can certainly be our own sponsors and encourage people out there in the public eye. And of course, Cece, I would just simply say it's a really good time to support independent art, right? Art that's not corporate controlled, corporate driven, independent work. Like right now in America, that needs to be supported. I don't think that needs to be explained in
Right.
great detail for the members of our audience. So it's a good thing to do, and you get to enjoy some really good music. All right, CC. So thanks for that. Now let's
Yeah.
get into the Big Ten USC Big Ten schedule.
Yeah, before we even get to the Big Ten, I just want to talk about the schedule in general because, like I said, it's brutal the way the games are aligned and the teams that they're playing. I mean, I think they're going to have one of the toughest schedules in the entire NCAA when it comes to women's basketball. I mean, they start off at New Mexico State November 4th, and then right after New Mexico State, they fly to North Carolina State and have to play North Carolina State on November 9th. So that's right into it, right into the season. No, only one game really, one practice game, and then they're heading to North Carolina State. And then after that, right after North Carolina State, they come back and guess who they play? South Carolina. So, I mean, when we talk about just breaking down this front part of the schedule before we even get to Big Ten play, it's like you got two back-to-back opponents that are going to test you early. So I'm really intrigued on how the mentality of this team is going to go into these games at the beginning of the season. And I'm looking forward to those first two games. I'm excited. So what are your thoughts just on that, just that little bit of a start right there?
Well, the non-con's brutal, but Lindsey Gottlieb wants her team to be tested and challenged, which I think is smart. And I think that the key thing for USC women's basketball fans to keep in mind is, without JuJu, certainly in November and December, and you're taking on all these teams, I think people get this intellectually, but emotionally, there needs to be a realization of, it's not just going to be, all these great conquests. I mean, you're going to try to win every game, but USC is not going to have a number one seed level team this season. I just think we have to adjust that expectation. It doesn't mean that USC can't make a run in March, because I think the Trojans certainly could. And you and I have had the discussion. A lot of experts think this is not a top 25 caliber team, which, to me is crazy pants. This that of course USC is going to be a top 25 caliber team, but in terms of navigating the schedule, realistically, if USC can just win one out of every two of the marquee games, if it can, or even just pick off one out of every three, that's going to be a decent achievement for a team that's, missing a superstar level player. So, like, we still are going to aspire to greatness, but the road, the path is going to be a little bumpier, and just expectations do need to be downgraded early in the season. But in terms of USC evolving over the course of the full season, it really makes sense to load up that non-con with high-end tests so that when you get into the Big Ten, it's not going to feel nearly as daunting. So Lindsey Gottlieb's schedule building, I like it. I like the way she built the non-con to lead into the Big Ten. So this is going to be a grind, but it's going to feel like less of a grind going through all those high-end opponents in November and December.
It's really interesting that you talk about expectations because in the presser, Lindsay spoke about expectations and she spoke about how just you just said nobody's expectation of USC is all that, right? And but within the team, the expectation is still the expectation, and so they expect uh, to make a deep run in the tournament, and they expect to act like a championship team, whether the outsiders see them as such or not. You know what I mean? So I thought that was a very good statement that she made regarding expectations for this team, and also as far as expectations, I think that yeah, in the beginning of the season, it should be downgraded as a lot of teams should because they're trying to find chemistry and find out what works and everything like that. But she also complimented the team as a whole and, and how much experience they're bringing to the team, how much talent is on this team in different positions, and that it's going to be a fun team to watch. So I'm really excited to see this team because it's such a different team. You know what I mean? And she commented on everybody was used to seeing Rhea and Clarice and Kiki on the floor. So everybody thinks that their front court is just not going to be all that. But mind you, she talked about Cobb Milton. She talked about Gerda. She talked about Viv and Laura. I mean, that's four posts that are all athletic and ready to bring it. So it's just going to be interesting to see what this team does. And in the beginning of the season, yeah, they're going to be tested. They go to Portland right after, or they play Portland right after South Carolina. And then again, right after Portland, they play Notre Dame. So it's like boom, 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 boom. You know what I mean? It's crazy, you know? Then they have two games like in between. Some you would rest games, you would think, Tennessee Tech, or three. Tennessee Tech, Pepperdine, St. Mary's. St. Mary's is always a tough out. They come ready to play. And then right after that, they have Washington. You know what I mean? And Washington is going to be a new look team too, And then they have one of our players that transferred there who I'm sure is going to want to beat us. And then right after Washington, guess who they play? They play Washington on December 7th, which is a Sunday. Then right after that, that following Saturday, December 13th, they play UConn. So they're going to have two back-to-back tough games again between Washington and UConn. So this team is going to be set up and tested. So by the time, now that Washington game is a Big Ten game, but by the time they really hit the flow of the Big Ten, whew, they're going to be tested, you know? So
And Lindsey Gottlieb wants it that way. And again, I think that's smart. And so I think one of the things you and I agree with, at least I sense that you agree with me on this, it's less about getting a certain seed, uh, or the overall win-loss total, because there are probably going to be points along the way where USC might lose but could learn a ton
yeah,
about how to play together, and it's more about the whole journey. Now, when this team had Juju, like the expectation was be a number one seed, win the Big Ten. USC's not operating really in that same framework. I mean, the players internally they might say, "Hey, like this, we always pursue these goals." But I'm sure Lindsey Gottlieb has the big picture in mind where, hey, we don't have our full roster intact, certainly for the first 2 months, and it could be the whole year, if Juju never takes the court for this team. I think Lindsey Gottlieb, I'm sure she's saying this privately, it's about the full evolution. Let's just keep growing, growing, growing over the year. It might mean we lose painfully at several stages along the way, but as long as she sees and develops growth and evolution, this team could be really, really dangerous. It could be the kind of opponent no one wants to face in March Madness. So the paradigm is certain, and the structure are certainly different in terms of what we measure as progress, what we measure as success over the course of the season. And when you get to March, you do want to post a really good result, but I think it's less about having to do everything at the top level. That's been the past 2 years with Juju. Now, this time, because the landscape's different, I think it gives this team a little more space to think about, let's just improve. Let's just evolve, discover what works, discover how we can best play together. And for Lindsay and Beth Burns and the rest of the staff, what are the best combinations in terms of five on the floor, in terms of minute distribution, all those things. I think this team just has a little bit more space. It's not going to be like, if you lose this December game, to a UConn, the season is not going to measure up. No, it's not that kind of thing. There's going to be a little bit more room for this team to grow, and that could be a really good thing in the long run.
Yeah, I think one of the things that she talked about that resonated with me in the presser was the fact that she said last year she felt that this team had a lot of pressure, or last year's team had a lot of pressure on them out the gate, because the expectations were so high. And so playing through that was a lesson for everybody. You know what I mean? And so, and the one thing about Lindsay is she talks about, I mean, every team that I've seen her coach, she's always talking about plateau. You don't want to plateau too early. You want to reach your best right when March hits, as you were saying. So I think, yeah, the trajectory of this team is going to be a steady rise throughout the season, and working on what you said, what works. But I think defense is going to be a focal point, as she mentioned in the presser. But they're going to have so many ways that they can score as well, whether it be on the front court or the guard court that they're going to be playing. So it's going to be interesting. But that's a good point. The expectation is not as much pressure as they had on them last year from out the gate, with that team, because of the stardom that they had on that team. Now they have less fanfare, but they still have good players that people are really just not really talking about, which I think is a great thing, because we got some stars on this team, from Jazzy to Care on down. So I think as we continue to grow through the season, like you said, the expectation's not going to be as what it was last year, but by the time they hit March, they're going to be flowing.
Before we get into the specifics of the Big Ten schedule, let me make one more point on the heels of what you just said and our conversation right now about expectations and enjoying being the hunter, not the hunted, because USC was
Yeah.
definitely hunted last season. This season, at least, if Juju never takes the floor, USC can treat itself as the hunter. No one believes in us. No one thinks we could do anything. Just the point to make, look at the Indiana Fever in the WNBA. No Caitlin Clark. No one gave them a chance in heck uh,
Yeah.
to beat the Atlanta Dream, and yet they do it. Like, I see USC, this season's team, being able to take on that underdog mindset and just absolutely get after it on defense. Nothing to lose, no pressure. No one thinks you're going to amount to anything. Get after it. That, like, I mean, I'm sure these USC women's basketball players, they watch the W, they follow the W, and I'm sure someone in that USC locker room is saying, "Hey, that can be us. That can be us."
Yeah. I definitely think that they're going to come out and play with a chip on their shoulder the entire season. Um, because, you know what I mean? They're just going to come out ready to play. They're going to have that dog mentality. One other thing that Lindsay said in the presser that was really a good point was that, she felt that Kennedy Smith is probably, in her opinion, the best defensive player in the NCAA. That's just her thought. And so when you have a defensive player on your team like that, that's just an outright dog, everyone that's playing with you wants to play better defense as well. So that's why I think this team defensively, they're going to be a tough out defensively. They're going to be a really good team defensively.
No
So
question
yeah.
about it.
So as we continue on with the schedule, they go Cal Poly, then they have Cal, and then they head into the heart of the Big Ten. They go Nebraska. And here's the thing, they have to travel to Nebraska. That game's on a Monday night, December 29th. And then they come home and they play UCLA at Poly Pavilion. Or I should say the other school at Poly Pavilion on January 3rd. So, I mean, just back to back to back to back. When you talk about, playing ranked teams, I'm talking about playing ranked teams.
Mhm.
You got North Carolina State, South Carolina, Notre Dame, UConn, and then UCLA. And they're all going to be ranked in the top 10. So right off the bat, you're just testing your team over and over and over again. Then they
Yeah.
play Oregon, January 6th, that Tuesday. So the games are 5 days apart. So they have UCLA on January 3rd, and then they have that next Tuesday, Oregon. So they'll have one day off and 2 days to prepare between games at the Big Ten. I should say
Yeah.
between games
So,
within the Big Ten.
yeah. So, one of the things we talked about last season, the stretch of play in late January and early February was a real meat grinder for the Trojans. For fans who don't remember, they had a Thursday game at home against Minnesota. Then they had to turn around and play a Sunday morning game at Iowa.
That was crazy.
Then Wednesday at Wisconsin, and then Saturday against Ohio State. That was, lots of games with road trips, with plane flights, and just 2 days between games. Not a lot of time for this team to recuperate. When I look at this season's schedule, I don't see as many of those
Yeah.
situations. It's not quite as compressed. I see, at least a 3 day off situation when USC is making transitions from either home to road or road to home. So, like for example, uh, January 11 at Minnesota, next
Yep.
game January 15 against Maryland. 3 days between games. USC got caught in situations last year where there were just 2 days, 2 full days between games. So I'm not seeing that. So like it seems though the Big Ten was a little bit better,
Yeah.
and it didn't knock it out of the park. We'll get to some things in a bit that I don't like, but it seems that the Big Ten was a little bit better in terms of not squeezing games together too tightly.
Yeah, they play Oregon at home on January 6th. Then they fly to Minnesota that January 11th, and they'll probably fly home that night. So they'll get home that Sunday night late in the morning. They'll probably have Monday off as a rest day, and then Tuesday, Wednesday preparation for Maryland. So yeah, it seems like the Big Ten took note in some aspects, of what they need to do better. I'm still, and I think they have to schedule that way because, some of these schools are so far away. Whereas, still in the Pac-12, remember it was what Friday, Sunday.
Mhm.
I'd rather them do like especially when they travel to teams that are close together. Like they go to Michigan, right? Michigan State and Michigan. Those schools are only 4 hours apart. So why not do a Friday Sunday game? They come in on Thursday, play Friday, they can travel that Friday night or early, I don't know, you know what I mean? I just think that
Yeah,
the 5 days is just still a lot.
yeah. So let's point out for people who are listening to the show. So USC is at Michigan State on January 22nd, and then at Michigan on January 25th. And so the point CC is making, and it's a good one. I fully agree with it. Why isn't that Michigan game on January 24th? Or, for that matter, why isn't Michigan State on the 23rd if you're going to have Michigan on the 25th? If you're basically in the same spot, the same part of the country, and you're
Yeah.
not flying or traveling a long distance, why not just have the two games, Friday, Sunday, or for that matter, Thursday, Saturday, But no, there are 2 full days between Michigan State and Michigan. And so, so that is the rare instance. You pointed it out. That's the rare instance in which having 2 games in 3 days actually makes sense because it's just like an old Pac-12 road trip. And if USC had that little double Michigan stack in East Lansing and Ann Arbor compressed by 1 game, then you could conceivably, hypothetically, free up 1 day for later in the season. And this is my one. This is my
Yeah.
one real big gripe. I don't like playing UCLA on January 3rd. Like UCLA games should always be later in the season, but that's kind of a different deal, just in terms of the logistics and making
Yeah.
sure USC has adequate rest mixed in with the travel. The one real flaw I see here on this schedule is uh, February 12 against Indiana, then a whole week off, and then playing Wisconsin on the 19th, and then flying to Columbus to the Eastern time zone, one of the longer trips that USC can make in the Big Ten, playing Ohio State on the 22nd. So that's the compressed schedule between a home game and a long distance road game that, happened last year, which I didn't really like. So, having the whole week off and then having those Wisconsin and Ohio State games, one home, one away, so close together, that's bad scheduling.
And then
Having
they
Wisconsin on the 17th or even the 18th, but no, they wait until the 19th and then they have to quickly turn around and fly to Columbus for a February 22 game. See, that's bad scheduling. That's the one
well,
big error on the schedule as I see it.
the other big error too is they did that, and then instead of scheduling Penn State that Thursday, they go to Ohio State, and then they come back and schedule Penn State on a Wednesday. You see that? So they play February 22nd, and then they play Penn State that Wednesday. When usually that would be a Thursday game. You know what I mean?
Yep, yep,
And then they come back and
absolutely.
they have to play UCLA that Sunday, so they get that extra day, to prepare for UCLA. But still, their legs are gonna be tired because they only had 2 days off or whatever, that compressed schedule between Ohio State and Penn State. You know?
Yeah. So just to recap, Indiana on the 12th in February, Wisconsin on the 19th, Ohio State on the 22nd, Penn State on the 25th. So that's 4 games in 2 weeks, which, if you just mention it that way, it seems okay. But there's a full week break between the Indiana and Wisconsin games. And so Wisconsin, Ohio State, Penn State, 3 games in 1 week. So
Yeah,
that is just wildly imbalanced. Imagine a different schedule in which you have Indiana on the 12th, Wisconsin on, let's say, the 17th,
yeah,
and Ohio State on the 21st, and then
yeah,
Penn State on the 24th or 25th. You
yeah,
build it equal rest days. So, like, in other words, USC has 6 rest days between Indiana and Wisconsin, and then only 2. You could even just say it's only 1 because 1 day is for travel. So, one
yeah.
day of rest between Wisconsin, Ohio State, and 2 days of rest between Penn State. Instead, you should be doing it, have 3 or 4 days of rest for each of those 4 games, that Indiana, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Penn State quartet from February 12th through 25th. So, like, that is where the Big Ten really messed up with this schedule. We would agree on that.
Yeah, yeah, and then they're no games in the Big Ten are going to be easy games, but going to play Wisconsin and then coming back and playing Ohio State, that's going to be tough for SC, because Ohio State likes to run, and so they're going to be playing on tired legs, So when you look at the scheduling, not only the days of scheduling, but the way they scheduled the teams, the setup. It's kind of crazy, and then you go from Ohio State to Penn State and Keomi McMiller, and then you come back and have UCLA. As a matter of fact, Penn State and UCLA probably have the two best bigs in the Big Ten. Between Gracie Merkel and Lauren Betts, so you schedule them back to back. That's kind of crazy too.
Yeah, you're playing UCLA on March 1st in the regular season finale after the longest commute that USC has on this schedule. So, yeah, that back end is really nasty, and the Big Ten could have and should have handled it better. Let me transition into an area that kind of flows into and from what we've been discussing. CC, we had that discussion last year about the Wisconsin Wednesday game. That was on the heels of the Iowa game, and it was the lead into the Ohio State game. But USC had to fly from Madison to LA for that Ohio State game, just a short while later. We talked about the need for Lindsey Gottlieb to
To
manage
rest the
JuJu
players.
Watkins'
Yeah.
minutes in that Wisconsin game, and she did.
Yeah.
26 minutes, several minutes lower
Yeah.
than she normally played. And, that just re-emphasized for me that Lindsey Gottlieb gets it, not just in terms of managing a team and a season, but looking after her superstar player and what was in her own best interests. So, with that in mind, it seems as though when we look at this schedule, the Purdue game on the 18th, that's 3 days after what figures to be a very taxing, difficult game against Brenda Fries in Maryland. And after Purdue, you have the trip to Michigan State and Michigan. So that Purdue game on the 18th, and then that Wisconsin game that we already mentioned, leading into Ohio State and Penn State. To me, CC, those are two games in which Lindsey Gottlieb is once again going to have to manage minutes. And by manage, I mean reduce. Like
Yeah.
Kennedy Smith, who is probably going to be playing in mid 30s minutes because she's going to be so important to this team at both ends of the floor. Like I see the Purdue game on January 18th and the Wisconsin game on February 19th as nights when Lindsey and her staff are going to say to Kennedy, frankly, and also the rest of the team, this needs to be a committee night. This needs to be a night where no one's playing 30 minutes. We manage everything. It might not feel good in terms of like you don't get as much playing time, you don't get as much statistical output, but this needs to be a minute management night where we're thinking about our long-term goals. So Lindsey pulled it off last year with that Wisconsin game before Ohio State. And USC did drill Ohio State because it was fresh, because the stars were not overextended. So I'm looking at Purdue in January and Wisconsin in February as those similar kinds of situations for this upcoming season.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because even as you look at, after the Michigan games, they play Iowa, right? And Iowa is they like to run now. They're totally different. Well, they ran when Caitlin was there, but they're not going to be a bad team, but they're gonna want to come into Galen and beat USC. Now is USC going to be tired because they've had two tough games at Michigan and Michigan State are going to push them. I have Michigan State over SC as far as the Big Ten standings are concerned, and Michigan too. So I mean, I have Michigan, Michigan State, and then USC as far as Big Ten. So those two games right there are going to be really tough, and then you got to come back and play Iowa. Rutgers, is that going to be a rest game, or Northwestern? Is that going to be a rest game? One out of the two of those games got to be a rest game because then they got to come back and play Illinois and Indiana, which are going to be tough outs as well. So, yeah, the Lindsay's going to have to sit down and really do a puzzle, schematically and how she's going to, treat these games and hopefully prepare her team so they can come out in these lower echelon games and not have to, play the top players the entire game. They're going to have to be mentally prepared to put it on them in the beginning of the game so they can sit and rest for the back end of the second half of the games because the way the schedule's set up, there aren't many rest game opportunities.
That's right. One other really specific thing to point out, and this is not a criticism of the schedule, this is just a reality in terms of at least how we size up these teams in preseason projections. USC has three two-game Big Ten homestands. Like one home game is not really a home stand, it's just an isolated game. Multiple games represents a home stand, a run of games. So there's the Maryland Purdue homestand mid-January. There's the Iowa Rutgers homestand very end of January, start of February. And then there's that Indiana Wisconsin homestand in the middle of February. CC, pretty clear that the first game of each of those two homestands is the clearly tougher game, and the
Yeah.
second game of those homestands is the easier game. So, like, it seems to present an obvious situation in which Lindsey Gottlieb can say to not just her players, but also her coaching staff in terms of mapping out minutes, and kind of just beginning to get an expectation for, the grind of this Big Ten schedule. Stars, I need you in these first games, and then the second games need to be much more bench oriented collaborations, or is it not quite that simple, CC?
No, I think it's that simple, but you made a good point. And to elaborate further, that the away games that they have are all the harder competition games. So they're going to these away games like Michigan, Michigan State, like Ohio. Those are going to be the tougher teams in the conference, and you're sending them to those places. And it's just reverse. I mean, because Ohio State was in Galen this year, so they're just doing reverse of what they did last year. But it's just interesting that it plays out like that. Michigan, Michigan State, by far two of the toughest teams in the Big Ten this year. Ohio State's going to be tough. So all the tougher games are away, so to speak, quote unquote, or a lot of them.
Yeah, no, it's going to be really fascinating. And, one of the things that we talked about on previous shows over the summer, CC, was, we don't know exactly what USC's big rotation, what USC's front court rotation is going to look like. But you mentioned, like, there are lots of pieces to this puzzle. There are lots of options that USC can have. Now, of course, to an extent, as you pointed out, the matchup's going to determine, which players play and how much. But of course, that's going to be, now that we have this Big Ten schedule, we can maybe consider Lindsey Gottlieb not only trying to figure out her front court rotation based on matchup, but also based on rest minutes and how,
Yeah.
her front court and her back court can look together. The picture is a little clear. It's not completely clear, but it's a little bit clear. Like I can imagine, all four front court players getting a lot of run in these specific situations that we've talked about. The Purdue game before that nasty Michigan road trip, the Rutgers game, and also perhaps the Northwestern game before that Illinois Indiana double stack, and then that Wisconsin game before that Ohio State Penn State road trip. You'd think that those would all be targets for games in which to really rotate bodies in the front court as opposed to leaning on any one player for 30 or more minutes.
Yeah, I believe it just depends on what the game plan is going to be going into each game. The front court that we have this year is very athletic and very fast, and each one of them can do different things. One of the things that Lindsay pointed out in the presser was that last year, uh, not too many people were aware, but Viv was hurt when she got there and she had to have surgery. So she didn't get a full summer of practice in. So that kind of put her behind in her development. And then Laura Williams, as you know, tore her ACL at the beginning of the season, which put her out for the entire season. So now both of them are truly healthy and have had a really good off season. So you have Viv and Laura coming in 100%, and then you have Yakia, who has had a really good summer and has been a surprise to everybody. From what I'm hearing, she's been a surprise. And now you have Gerda, who can do different things internationally, and she's really good at that pick and roll out on the perimeter. So you have a front court that a lot of them don't play back to the basket. They're athletic. They can guard the rim. They can rebound. They can defend, and they can get out and rim run. So it's going to be interesting to see, like you said, the rotation and how they play against other teams with their bigs. And this year, you know, as noted before in one of my videos, this Big Ten conference is not a big heavy team. I mean, it's a guard heavy team. The best bigs, I did a thing on that, but by far Lauren Betts and Gracie Merkel, they're the tallest, I should say. They're, 6'6" and 6'5" and just good, right? Back their true post, back to the basket type post, and give me the ball and I'll throw it out or I'll make a move right around the rim. And the key's going to be, not letting them get that deep. But as far as the rest of the conference, you have Maryland that has 11 guards. I think when Gracie Merkel went to Maryland in the beginning, when she jumped in the transfer portal and picked Maryland to go to, I think Brenda Fries thought, wow, we're going to have a really good team because we got Gracie Merkel. And then Gracie Merkel ended up going back to Penn State, and now she's left with 11 guards. You know what I mean? So how is USC going to play against a team like that with 11 guards that are probably going to be like a Tennessee, rotating players in every 2 to 3 minutes because they're so guard heavy? So I don't know. The Big Ten, it's so different than, I still say it's so different than the Pac-12 because the makeup of the teams are all different and they all do different things well. And it fluctuates between what teams have bigs and what teams are going to be pushing their guard play. Ohio State's another team that's going to be pushing their guard play. So it's going to be fun. And the way the schedule is set up is going to be interesting to see what Lindsay Gottlieb does as far as scheduling and matchups and what she's going to do, when she plays each one of these different types of teams.
Anything else to add on this schedule? I mean, we've gone through a lot of different nuances and particularities with the schedule. Of course, UCLA twice. That's all. Those are going to obviously the two biggest games on any schedule USC is going to play in any season. I guess the a question a lot of our listeners would want to get your take on is of the non-UCLA games, which ones do you really have circled as either a game that, it would be really important if UCLA win or USC wins, or this is a game that's going to reveal a lot about this USC team. Like this could be a real growth point. It could be a real, it could stimulate some real evolution in this group. The non-UCLA games that you think are really big and also could be very revealing about this USC team.
Conference play, correct?
Yes,
Conference play.
conference. Yeah.
Definitely Michigan and Michigan State. That road trip is gonna say a lot about the mentality of this USC team because they're definitely going to be challenged. And like I said, I have Michigan and Michigan State finishing ahead of USC in the conference. So those two games I have circled definitely. I'm really intrigued by Iowa. I want to see what Iowa is gonna come with in Hannah Stolke. What that team is gonna look like. And then another game, like I said, that I'm really interested in is the Maryland game. How is Lindsay gonna combat that 11 guard offense for Maryland, and what is Brenda Freeze gonna do with that 11 guard offense? Just intriguing to me. Like how, with no really post deep post play. I mean, how is she going to defend? Is she going to go to more of a zone? Is she going to do a matchup? What is she going to press full court and try and slow teams down? I mean, it's so that Maryland game is really intriguing to me, but definitely Michigan and Michigan State.
Yeah, just for my NCC, in a long, in football, which has just 12 games on the schedule, just 9 games in the conference, you generally circle one game, maybe two, as like this is the turning point game of the season. Basketball, you can't quite go at it that way with 30 games overall and a long conference schedule that begins in December and goes all the way into early March. To say one game. And of course, we're all looking at UCLA, those two games as the biggest ones, no question about that. No one even disputes that. We don't even have to have that conversation. But in terms of just looking at this schedule in totality, I'm looking at the January segment of games: Minnesota, Maryland, Purdue, Michigan State, Michigan, Iowa.
Yep.
6 games, like 5 of those games figure to be really, really tough. Purdue
Yeah.
being the exception. And then you have a 5 game strip: Rutgers, Northwestern, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin. So those six really tough games in January are followed by really what is a pretty manageable 5 game stretch. Not saying USC is going to win all 5. Like at Illinois is going to be really, really tough. But
Did you say
Rutgers at
Minnesota?
home.
Did you say Minnesota too?
Minnesota starts the 6 game stretch in January on the
Yeah.
11th, running
I, I,
through
I think,
Iowa on the 29th, but then
yeah.
Rutgers, Northwestern, Indiana at home, Wisconsin at home. Like USC should definitely go 4-1 in that 5 game stretch from Rutgers through Wisconsin
Yeah.
in the first 3 weeks of February. So it brings up the point: if USC can survive that 6 gamer in late January, mid to late January, from Minnesota all the way through Iowa, then USC can, really begin to collect wins in early February, and it could put together a body of work that will lead to, like a top 4 seed
Yeah.
in the Big Ten tournament and a decent seed in the NCAA tournament. So for me, like if USC can go 3-3 in those 6 games from Minnesota through Iowa, that would represent survival. Now, ideally 4-2, but at least 3-3. Because that means that either USC is sweeping the home games in that segment, or it's getting a split of those Michigan games. Make
Yeah.
sure that the team does not crumble in those 6 games, and then in February the schedule does get softer before that finishing kick, which has Ohio State at Penn State and then UCLA.
The other game I want to bring up, or the other team I should say in the Big Ten is Penn State. Now I had them in the bottom, in the bottom 10 of the conference, but that's another team that's intriguing to me. And what is the coach? I think Coach Carol Riker is her name. I don't know it off the top of my head, but what is she going to do with Gracie Merkel and Keomi McMiller? Now, she's a really good guard coach. She knows how to coach guards. And the Minnesota guard, the Minnesota Lynx guard that plays for Minnesota Lynx used to play for her when she was at Marquette. So, what is she gonna, is she gonna try and control Keomi McMiller or how are Keomi McMiller and Gracie Merkel gonna play off each other? Because Gracie Merkel is a back to the basket type of post. She's not that fast. She gets rebounds because she knows how to push people out. She has a big body, but she cannot, she can't jump that well. What I just Carolyn Krieger is the coach's name. I'm just curious. That's a game that I want to watch, and I'm going to be following Penn State because of Keomi McMiller and Gracie Merkel, and I just want to see. And they have some other players that are on that team too that are viable. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that team, especially with Keomi McMiller, and how Carolyn uses her on that team. So
All right,
that's another
Cece.
game that I'm excited about.
Okay, and of course, we're recording this podcast in the middle of September, still a month and a half until the start of the season. And so, as we follow these Big Ten women's basketball programs in October practice, and then of course in the non-con, like the texture of this Big Ten women's basketball schedule is going to change before even that first game, which is on December 7th, as CC mentioned earlier in the show. December 7th, hosting Washington, and Avery Howell coming
Yep.
back to the Galen Center. That's going to be the juicy plot point for that game. And, as is now customary in college basketball, men and women, they put 1 or 2 conference games on an island in early December, but the meat of the schedule begins after Christmas. So that's going to be December 29th for this USC women's team at Nebraska, and then at UCLA on January 3rd, also as CC alluded to. So anyway, when the season gets going in early November, we're going to start to gather information on these teams. We're going to be keeping tabs, keeping notes. It's all going to evolve, but it was very fun, CC, to get this first look at the 2025-2026 women's Big Ten schedule. So CC, tell us what else you have going on at your USC Women's Basketball Media Lab, Substack, all the other things you have going on at your growing media empire.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it moving. You know what I mean? I recently put out a story on Substack yesterday, just with all the stuff going on. I had it on my heart, and how I felt about everything going on. So that was Substack because it wasn't sports related. I just put out a story on Media Lab regarding the presser yesterday, and I linked the video to it. I have a video coming out soon on Satia Fagan. She's a recruit that USC is they're highly looking at her, and she's 6'4", really good. She's from Australia. So I did a film breakdown on her that'll be coming out. I was going to put it out yesterday, but I had to push it back because of the presser. And then I have some podcast stuff brewing that I'm really excited about that I can't really talk about right now. But yeah, just keeping it moving.
And folks, in these 6 or 7 weeks before the start of the season, CC has amassed this amazing video and audio library of all the podcasts, one-on-one interviews with USC women's basketball movers and shakers, former players, current coaches, Like it's just a gold mine. And you want to go to the USC Women's Basketball Media Lab to access all these wonderful interviews and presentations, film breakdowns, like the whole deal. It's something for everyone, a different taste or a different angle for every women's basketball fan with different perspectives. CC has it all at her USC Women's Basketball Media Lab. Be sure to go over there and enjoy all the content CC's laid out this summer. Like CC hasn't taken it easy this summer, waiting for the season to start. No, she's been working as hard as ever. So enjoy and then share CC's content over at the USC Women's Basketball Media Lab. Any final thoughts, final words, CC?
Hey, Matt, I just want to thank you, man. You've been a huge supporter of me, and you're always positive and always pushing my stuff out there. So I really appreciate you, and it doesn't go unnoticed. I just want to let you know that you are a heck of a friend, and I appreciate you. And I'm so glad that we connected last year, it's been a growing friendship ever since. So I really just want to tell you I appreciate you, man, and thank you for all that you do.
I appreciate that. I'm knee deep in USC football, of course, but I'm going to get my social shares of CC's content on a consistent basis because that is obviously a priority. So it's a testament to your work and your professionalism, and I really respect that. So I want to keep sharing your work whenever and wherever I can and consistently.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Hey, and don't forget to check out that video, Maestro Pierre. Let's help each other in this world today. Most of us are trying to be entrepreneurs in a world that we are really confused about right now. So, if you see something on YouTube and you want to promote it, tell a friend, do whatever you need to do. But, that's my whole thing now is I'm going to start talking about folks that are trying to make a living and trying to grow independently. So make sure you guys go to Maestro Pierre's YouTube channel, and I'll put the link below and show him some love, and let's help him grow.
On that great note, this is Matt Zemek for CC Clay. Thanks for watching and listening to the latest Trojans Wired podcast. We'll see you next time. Fight on.
Fight on, fight on, fight on.